Hey everybody, Brian Goulet here of GouletPens.com, and this is episode number 193 of Goulet Q&A. And this one's a little weird. We're having to kind of skip around a bit on this one because technically I just got back from my trip to Heidelberg, Germany at the Lamy factory, but I'm actually recording this on, what day is it? November 22nd, like 2 weeks ago, because obviously, I couldn't be recording this here when I'm actually in Germany, so it's a little bit awkward right now. So I'm shooting this almost 2 weeks in advance, so it's going to be a little bit different format than usual. I don't really have any like, hey, this is what I did this week, other than I will have gone to Germany at this point, and hopefully it will have been a great trip by the time that this is actually publishing. It's a little weird. But anyway, so I can't predict the future, so I can't really talk about what's been happening, but let's just say that there's just been some amazing things going on. So much news, so many pens. It's the holidays now, you know, Christmas music is now like officially acceptable to be playing on the radio and whatnot. I know some people are like purists about like when the music should come on the radio. But anyway, so here we are. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I don't really have a lot to talk about other than some questions. So I will say this is the first video that I have with our new videographer, Andy. She is sitting right behind the camera here, and it's going to be weird because we've recorded several together, but this is the first Q&A we shot together. Anyway, we're recording a whole bunch at once, and I don't know what order they're going to publish, but this is Andy's first week, so welcome, Andy. It's great to have you here. So she's not going to be sitting in with me probably on every Q&A, but she is on this one, so if I happen to be a little bit punchy and looking off the screen, it's because I'm trying to make her laugh as I'm saying stuff, because she's getting used to my style. All right, so I got a bunch of questions. These are all pen and writing questions because didn't have a lot to talk about as far as like new products and things that are going on right now. I wanted to go with some more kind of evergreen questions. So I think I've chosen some good ones that are somewhat of more like, I'll call them fundamental. I'm not going to call them like basic or entry-level questions, but more fundamental questions that are pretty good general questions that I think will be very referenceable in the future. So for anybody that's new or really wanted to kind of stick to the basics in terms of using fountain pens and certain fundamentals of them, I think this will be a really good Q&A for you. So let's start it off with King of Pop 771 on Instagram. What is the best way to carry an eyedropper pen? Okay, so there's a lot of appeal with eyedropper pens, and for those of you that don't know what an eyedropper pen is, it's not any like one particular pen. It's basically a style of pen that's usually a cartridge converter pen that is adapted or converted into an eyedropper pen. And that's basically just where you unscrew, you take out the converter or the cartridge, you put some silicone grease or maybe O-rings around the threads, and you fill the entire body of the pen with ink. So you have a much larger ink capacity. The appeal there is that, of course, you can have all this ink and you basically don't ever have to think about filling it up. That's the allure, but that's not often what actually ends up happening in reality, because there's physics involved in terms of how ink, which is mostly made of water, about how that actually works inside an enclosed cavity like this. So I'll talk about just a little bit of the basics of eyedropper conversion like that, so you get kind of a fundamental understanding of it, and then to the practical stuff about like how do you actually carry it. So the challenge you have with eyedropper pens is you're dealing with a rather large ink capacity. And what happens is when you have a large amount of ink in here, everything's great for a while as your ink is mostly full in the pen. But you end up running into a lot of the same situations that you do when you're changing altitudes. Like if you're flying or driving in the mountains and changing altitude a lot, you end up with pressure changes and the ink level becomes a little bit unstable in the pen, and you get some like burping and leaking and stuff like that that can happen. Now, there's a lot of kind of speculation out there in the pen community about why this actually happens. It's pretty universally accepted that it happens more when the ink level is lower. Like usually when you're under half of your ink kind of capacity filled, maybe a little bit lower, around a third or so, kind of depends on the pen. But that's when you can start to get some burping as you're writing. And where it gets a little bit controversial is that some people think it's the heat from your hand, like heats up the air inside of here, and I've talked about that a little bit before too, but I've talked to some other people that kind of know their stuff in the pen industry, and they kind of dispute that a little bit. So I think generally it's controversial as to what actually causes it somewhat. And I was going to say a physician, but that's not what it's called. I'm not a physics person. What do you call a physician? Somebody who studies physics. A physician is like a doctor, right? I don't know. Help me out, Andy. Do you know? Not a physician. No. That's a doctor. But physicist. Like physicist. Boom. Andy, adding value day one here. So a physicist. or, chemist or anything like that. I don't know. I didn't do that great in school, so this kind of stuff I'm more about like, how should you actually carry it? I don't know the physics behind it necessarily, but I know that basically it's not as stable when there's a large body of air that's kind of trapped in the back of the pen here, and then as you're writing, basically it's going to be more prone to want to burp out of the pen. So that's in practicality what you're going to end up dealing with. And then a lot of the debate could be like, well, what's the point of having a pen with a very large ink capacity if you can only keep it filled from halfway or greater? Well, that's a great point. Now, some pens, you can still get such a larger ink capacity that it's still worth it, even if you're only using the back half or 2/3 of the ink capacity. But for other people, it's just not worth it, and who cares about eyedropper conversion? But there is an allure, there is an appeal, so I get the question, and that's why I wanted to answer it. So, in all practicality, now that I've thoroughly explained all the scientific stuff behind it, what you're actually dealing with here is very similar to if you were flying with a pen. And I've got a couple of videos on that you can, just Google those, how to fly with a pen, Brian flying, all that kind of stuff. But really the couple of principles you want to have is if you keep it nib up, you're going to be in pretty good shape. So if you're carrying a pen around in your pockets, if you have like a shirt pocket or something like that, or your pants pocket, and you're generally staying pretty upright, I'm assuming you're not like hanging upside down in your office all the time or something weird like that, then you're pretty much going to be okay, because any kind of instability or ink burping or anything like that wouldn't really be happening, because your your air is going to be closer to the nib where it can actually escape and kind of equalize itself. If you have your pen kind of stored sideways or upside down like this, then your body of air is here and your ink is here, and basically if anything is happening pressure-wise or it's getting jarred around, the only place for your ink to go is right out of the nib into the cap. There you go. See, I think I just dripped a little bit in there as I shook it. How about that? Little demonstration there as to what's happening with a demonstrator pen. How cool is that? Oh, the benefits you get with Q&A. So, trying to keep the nib pointed up is kind of like a rule number one. That's not always practical, I get that. Trying to keep your ink level higher, so keeping the pen more on the full side, is going to be most ideal in terms of practicality. So if you're thinking to yourself, well, I wanted to eyedropper convert a pen because I wanted to be able to throw it into my purse or my backpack and basically never have to think about when I have to fill it again until it's almost completely dry, it doesn't, in all execution practicality, it doesn't really end up working out quite like that. You have to give it a little bit of thought, but if you use a demonstrator pen where you can see it and the ink level's clear and all that kind of stuff, it can still be a benefit. It's just not like the perfect end-all be-all situation. So eyedropper conversion is not for everyone, and of course there's an inherent somewhat risk of, if you don't seal it properly or, it ends up getting crushed or cracked or something like that, it can leak. So I think carrying it around in something like a pen sleeve or a pen slip could be helpful. That way, if there is a little bit of a leak coming out of it, it's not getting all over your pocket or all over your purse or something like that. And the other option too, if you really want to be kind of fail-safe with it, is to store it inside like a Ziploc bag or something, and it's actually sealed up, and then even if the worst happens and the thing just completely goes to crud, then ink doesn't end up getting all over your stuff. It kind of stays contained. So you can weigh out whether that's worth it to you to go through all that trouble or not, but either way, know that that is an option with some cartridge converter pens out there, but only the ones that have a completely sealed body. I think I failed to mention that at the beginning of the video, but you obviously, if the pen's got holes in the back of it or something, you would not be able to eyedropper convert it. That seems pretty obvious, but it's worth stating as well. And I think that pretty much exhausts this question, and I think we'll move on. Next question I have is from Yoga to Ride on Instagram. Yoga to Ride, or Yoga Toridi, it's probably Yoga to Ride, on Instagram. What are some of the best ways to carry your pen on your person if you only want to carry one? Many of the cases I see are for multiple pens, but oftentimes I only want to carry one pen. Well, you are not alone there, but you are talking to a guy here who has pretty much at any given time, like maybe 20 to 30 pens on him. So I fall more into the camp of somebody that likes to carry large pen cases at a time, but I do carry some individually as well on my person. So I also feel rather qualified to answer this question for you too. So that's why I took it. All right, so you don't really have to use a case at all. Like that's option number one, right? Like, so if you have a pen, part of the beauty of fountain pens and the appeal of them when they first came out, right? Like, think these were like the iPhone of, the early 1900s, was that it has a self-contained ink reservoir inside the pen, and you can carry it around with you, and it doesn't require any extra apparatuses to be able to operate. So that is totally an option. And it's really up to you. It depends on the price of the pen and what it's made of, and if you are going to be carrying around $1,000 precious, pen inside your pocket with your keys, maybe I would recommend a case, but it's really up to you. It's your life, and I suggest you live it. So what I tend to do, there's some pens that I'm very okay carrying it around. They're not super valuable, or I just don't really care. I want them to get kind of like pocket worn, right? And those I'll carry around as long as I don't feel like I'm going to run to the risk of any kind of leaking or anything like that, which for me, honestly, has been very rare that that's ever happened to me. So it shouldn't be like of the utmost concern. But I also don't wear super nice clothes either. So if I get a little ink on my jeans, who cares? They're blue anyway, and I probably have blue ink in my pen. So you might be in a different situation. If you got like nice white dress pants or something and you're carrying around like a hot pink ink in your pen, maybe you want to take a different consideration. But for those of you who don't care like me, you could literally just carry a pen around inside your pocket. Or if you got a shirt pocket or something like that, you can just kind of clip it in there. Most pens have clips. They'll kind of hold themselves in your pockets. You can, some pens, if they've got thicker clips, you can clip them inside your pants pockets. That's going to really depend on what kind of pants you're wearing and the design of the pen and stuff like that. But really, that's option number one. Another option I have is a pen slip or a sleeve or something like that. This is the Aston pen slip, which we have. They're just under $14. They're made of leather, super durable. I've literally been using this one for probably 6 years. It's well worn, right? Like it's earned the right to look like this. It's super broken in, and that's what I really like about just leather in general. So that is totally an option for you. Probably one of the most economical options for carrying on an individual pen. And it provides enough protection, but also for me, I like it because it's soft and it doesn't like bind up and cause like this big bulge in my pocket, because I carry mine around my front pocket. So that's a really attractive option for me, and that's the one I've been using for years. So I definitely recommend that. When it gets outside of like a pen slip like this, there are definitely other options. I'll be completely honest with you. I don't carry a lot of them in our store because they're not super popular. Like they're just not very much requested. Part of that I think is because, it's a little bit of like a cart before the horse kind of thing. I think we end up catering more to like the die-hard fountain pen, like everything in my life revolves around fountain pens, kind of, maybe not that, but like everything in my writing world is fountain pen based, and I like to carry around 7 different pens with 12 different inks in them. That's impossible, but you get what I mean. So we tend to just have naturally more demand for cases that hold 20 pens, right? Like that's just, it makes sense. And then if you think about like a per pen, like a cost of the case per pen for storage, it's much more economical to go the route of a multi-pen case. If you are trying to carry just a single or a double or something like that, you're often going to pay disproportionately more for the protection for that individual pen. Case in point, Visconti. We do carry a single, hard case for Visconti. Here it is. Isn't it cute? Just a cute little thing. So, if I wanted to, yes, I could carry this around instead of my slip. Let's go ahead and try it out. The Homo sapiens inside a single slip. There you go. Promise this is not sponsored by Visconti, but I am plugging our own products here. So there you go. Isn't that cool? So I could totally carry this around. It's a little bulgy, to carry around in my pocket. If it's like a purse or backpack or something, yeah, 100% legit. This would work. If I could carry this around my pocket, yeah, I can do it. I'm going to go ahead and just try to squeeze it in here and see. I haven't actually carried this thing around in my front pocket before, so okay. It's actually not bad. It's actually not as bad as I thought it would have been. So that'll totally fit. It's a little more bulgy than my slip. So totally doable though, but this thing is $85. $85 for an individual thing versus $13.90. Is that going to be worth it to you? That's really going to depend on what it is that you want. Stylistically, yeah, this is cool. This has a completely different look, but it's going to be up to you. And this is on the more expensive end, Italian leather and all that kind of stuff. But if you wanted to go more the route of like Aston or Girologio is the other brand that we have, and go in like a single pen case kind of route, it often ends up being just as much work for the manufacturers to produce a single pen case as it is to do a double or even a triple. It uses slightly less material to do a single, obviously, but I've talked to folks like at Knock, for example. I've asked them about like doing single pen cases and stuff like that, and they're like, it's literally as much, if not more work to do a small object like that in terms of labor than it is to do like a much larger case. So that's why it ends up not being super economical to do that, and I think that kind of folds into, it's like a 1-2 punch of like they cost more to do that, and then just in terms of people that are, really into pens usually like to carry kind of an assortment of them. 3 cases end up tending to be pretty popular for us around here. And of course, if you go up to like a 10 or a 20 case or something like that, that's something more that you're going to carry around like in a backpack, right? You're not really carrying this around on your person. So you got a couple of options there, but I'm actually really curious to know, is this a situation, because we do have some options with like Aston Leather and Girologio to be able to carry more single pen cases like this. They end up being more expensive. You're not going to get anything in the price range of like a slip case, but if you're looking in like the $40 to $50 range, there are some options there for individual pen cases. We haven't carried them before because there has not been a whole lot of demand, but because the question came up in Q&A, if you want to give feedback on that in the blog or on YouTube, go ahead and just like ask and be like, oh my gosh, I would love to have something like that. And maybe we can look into it a little bit more. That's part of the cool thing about doing this whole engagement thing, right? Back and forth, internet, YouTube, cool. Another option that I have for you, this is not even like anything that I carry, but there's all kinds of people on Etsy and like doing handcrafted kind of stuff that make single slip kind of cases, very affordable ones out of denim or some kind of cloth and things like that. There might be like pencil cases and things like that that are smaller that could work for you, that you could source out on eBay, Etsy, like those types of places. And you could probably find some affordable stuff there. I know I've seen some before. I've never been able to source any out reliably enough to be able to offer any of them, but I know I've been approached by several kind of like individual people that are like kind of side hustle making these things just out of their own interest. And so there are some cool options there that you can explore if you're looking for single cases. And then the last thing I have, this is not really a single case per se, but just some options to carry single pens around with you. If you happen to carry around a notebook with you, like, the Traveler's Notebook, or, Lloydstrom has this little stick-on pen sleeve that if you ever wanted to, be able to do that. Let's see if I can get this thing in here. It's a little elastic thing that, if you want to be able to carry around a single pen on your person and you're carrying around a notebook anyway, look at that. Isn't that cool? Just kind of comes right along there. And then Midori has the same option here. This one is just, it's a little bit different. It's kind of made more for their leather case. Not quite as universal as the stick-on Lloydstrom one. And the Lloydstrom one is, they're both pretty affordable. But there you go. So that's, you can stick that inside any notebook. So just some other options there, things you may not have been aware of that could be good for carrying around a single pen. But that is pretty much it for that. Cool? All right. Next question is from Supertronic on Instagram. What makes a flex nib able to flex? Fair enough. For example, shape, material, thickness, the way it's made, etc. My short answer is all of the above. All of these things, shape, material, thickness, the way it's made, all of that comes into play about how flexible something is. It sounds obvious, but flexibility is the key for a flex nib. Let me dissect that a little bit more because that is such a cop-out answer, answering the definition with itself, right? So the softness of the nib material itself. So typically you're going to see flex nibs traditionally have been made out of gold nibs, or think about like Visconti with their palladium nibs are softer. There might be some titanium, so there are definitely some metals that are inherently softer metals. That in and of itself will cause more flexibility just because the elemental components of that material are more pliable, more flexible. Something like a stainless steel is not inherently as flexible. It's a stiffer, harder material, right? There's some advantages and disadvantages of both, but that is a huge factor right there. So that's why traditionally you're going to see a lot of flex nibs have been made out of gold. Let's see here. The shape of the nib definitely comes into play. I have a really good example of that. and how that works out. So let's go into Zoomtown here, and I'll show you. So I have the Aurora 88 Flex. Nope. The Aurora 88 Flex. And he's going to cringe because she's going to see all my neck hair here, but this is just what we got. All right, so this is the Aurora 88 Flex. And the reason I have the Optima is because literally it's the same nib that starts as kind of the foundation for that, but they have done some thinning of the material, and then especially where the wings are right here. So this is the flex nib. So you can see here it's a little bit pointier. They've actually ground out more to just kind of cause relief on the side. And that allows for more flexibility than the traditional nib here. So that shows you an example of how the actual shape of the nib itself can impact the flexibility of it. Another thing that I've seen nibmeisters do is rather than cutting out the side of the nib here and thinning out the material here, they'll actually thin the material out this way. So they'll kind of take a Dremel, this is with the nib off of the pen obviously, but they'll take a Dremel and they'll kind of like shave the underside of the nib to thin out the material to make it more pliable. Now that is challenging. It's difficult to do that well, and it takes a lot of obviously hand craftsmanship. Now surely you could to some degree do that in the manufacturing process to do it, but that's something as like an aftermarket thing that I've seen some nibmeisters do to adjust and add flexibility to an existing nib. The balance that you end up striking here is, if you're talking about thinning or modifying the nib at all, is how much is just the right amount. And this is where it really becomes kind of an art form. And before I expand on that too much, I wanted to show you one other option. I kind of forgot about this one, but this is the, I got to zoom back in. This is the Edison Flex Nib, and this is made by Yovo, so you'll see this made from Franklin Christoph. Maybe a couple other companies will have this. They're not producing these in large quantities right now. Believe me, I've inquired if we could get Goulet nibs like this too, and they basically have said not now because we can't handle the capacity, but it's something that I'm interested in the future. This one, literally, they've taken a standard nib and just cut these notches into it, so it allows for flexibility to happen on the, let's see here, when there's pressure on it. I'm going to try and actually show you what happens with this one. So what happens when you cut a notch out of the side of it, and you can see there, how it's kind of doing that. It's going to bend, but you can see it's kind of bending more like in the middle. So depending on what you do, if you're cutting out the wings, if you're thinning the material, if you're cutting notches out of the side, this ends up making it right a little bit softer feeling, but you can see there how much it's separating out the nib from the actual feed itself. So there it's not actually splitting the tines and causing as much line variation as much, but it just makes it feel very soft. If you push this one too far, you'll actually end up bending this up too much, and it can cause more damage than good. So you got to be careful depending on the technique that's done to cause the flex to be able to occur. The balance that you're always going to strike, this is going back to my thought from earlier, is why it's kind of like part art and part science, is when you're talking about adding flexibility to a nib, how do you determine exactly how soft and how flexible you want that nib to be, but also allow it to spring back and come back into form and be able to last for a long time. So there's always a balance to be struck there in between those two, the durability and being able to spring back versus being able to get a nice glorious flex. That's why when you get into something like a Noodler's Flex Pen, like those are stainless steel nibs, and those gain their flexibility partly by the shape of the nib, but partly because the slit of that nib is cut so far deep into that nib. That's where a lot of that flexibility comes from. It's still a much stiffer flexibility than what you would get with a gold nib, but it springs back and is a little more durable too. So there's always going to be a trade-off. But that is part of what makes these flex nibs so interesting, and every manufacturer of them has kind of a different approach. And that's also why you don't see these things like crank out and mass produced, because it is a bit challenging, and everybody has kind of their different preferences, and it's part of what makes the fountain pen world so interesting, right? All right, next question I have is from Arachne's Threads on Instagram. This is from Instagram. So I bought a Stipula Etruria, and it came with a registration warranty to fill out and send back to Stipula. I did, but I never heard back from them. What is this for, and what can you tell me about it? So I looked at my own Stipula Etruria, and I grabbed the little warranty instruction booklet thing, and this one actually had I don't know the context of yours. This one had it where you just register online. So I don't know if you had like a physical card or what, but it covers like how to fill the pen, how to do all that kind of stuff. So most pen companies end up having some kind of instructions, not everybody, but there's some kind of instruction about like how to fill, how to clean, whatever, how to maintain the pen. Other companies just don't have anything in there, and that's really up to them too. And then some have like a full, like your traditional kind of warranty registration card that you fill out. That I think is a little more old school. And I don't have any context specifically from Stipula about what they do with that information. So I'm going to speak a little more generally. So kind of stepping back specifically from your question about Stipula, I'll speak a little more generally. So from my understanding as a business human, a business person, there's a couple of different reasons why companies want warranty registration information. And look, I buy things all the time, right? Like there's warranty registration information for, like baby gear and, other things where you're like, why would I need warranty registration on this $20 item? Like I'm never going to make a warranty claim on this, whatever, water bottle or something weird like that. And it's like, some people might, that's totally fine. But I think there's a couple different reasons why manufacturers want to know this stuff. One is to get really just a better understanding of who their customers are. Another one is to have a more efficient process in place. If there was ever a warranty claim to be had, they would already have your information on file, have proof that you purchased it, that kind of stuff. And then another one is just to improve the legitimacy of the purchase. So some manufacturers, especially if they're more discerning, and they want to have kind of a tight network of distribution, they want to make sure that they're all non-counterfeit, like legitimate products that are bought through authorized retailers, that kind of thing, especially for stuff like a warranty claim where they're covering, part of that in the cost of the product that you're buying. If you're buying like gray market or off-brand or knockoff or whatever, they would want to, have some more detailed information on that. And if you have the official kind of warranty information, then that's something that would kind of help with that. So the thing I want to expound upon a little bit is a better understanding of who their customers are. And I have some insights into this because I'm a part of the distribution chain, right, for a lot of these manufacturers, Stipula being one of them. A lot of these manufacturers, they make things, in Stipula, they're not a large company, and I'll use them just as an example. They're not a huge company. They don't have vast, infinite resources about all the different markets in the world and who the customers are and why they're buying the pens and the different demographics of age and, just how much they use their pen, all that kind of stuff. They don't have all that information globally on kind of who's buying their stuff. That's why they have distributors in different parts of the world, because they know the different local taxes and shipping things and customs fees and all that kind of stuff. And even just like marketing of like what's desirable in certain regions. Like the US market is very different than the European market and the Asian market, depending on different things. Like, it's interesting to me sometimes like how different colors of pens even can sell so drastically in, say, Asia versus the US. You know what I mean? Like Asia tends to have more popularity around earth tones, things like browns and greens and stuff like that. The US market, it's all like, give me the shiniest, flashiest, biggest, heaviest thing that you can. Like, and that's just, it's a very different kind of thing than what so that's part of where like the distribution network comes in, is manufacturers rely on having that kind of information. I'm going somewhere with all this, I promise. You're like, what does it have to do with a warranty card? I'm getting there, okay? So then you have retailers like me, right? Like I'm a retailer, so like for large pen brands, right? Like you name it, not just Stipula, but like Pilot, Lamy, whoever, like they'll have distributors set up in all different parts of the world who know kind of like regions, different countries or groups of countries and kind of larger regions who might have their own intricacies of different regulations on shipping and environmental impact and all this kind of stuff. But then you have individual retailers who might have their focus. So for example, and even just within the US, like we're an online retailer, we focus on, newer users and people that are like hardcore using their pens, but there might be somebody else who's like a brick and mortar jewelry store that focuses on like luxury collectibles, or you might have a kiosk in an airport where they're focusing purely on people who are traveling and want gifts as they're traveling, and they might have a large international presence. So it's like there's all different kinds of retailers who have different focuses too. So for a manufacturer, and this is where I'm tying it all together here, so hang in there. So for a manufacturer to get direct contact with the end user, the end buyer of the pen, to have direct contact with them, there's an inherent value in it for them to be able to understand really who is it that's actually buying these pens at the end of the day. Now, how many people are actually filling out these warranty cards and doing all that kind of stuff? it's not the majority of the people that are buying these pens, but at least then if they wanted to do a survey or do any specific kind of like reaching out or marketing or service related contact directly with you as the customer, it's much easier for them to do that if they have your warranty registration information than if they were to talk to their different distributors and then talk to all the different retailers and the retailers talk to all the different customers. You get like a game of telephone where it can be difficult to kind of get that information in any kind of a timely manner. So that's one way that just in general, like most product-based kind of manufacturers might see an advantage with going with product registration information. These days, I don't know how critically important that is, to be quite honest with you, because the flow of information and social media and email and direct contact that companies can have with customers these days, I think, there's still some value with like having proof that like, yes, this person bought this pen through an authorized retailer and we have direct contact with them. Yeah, there's a value to that, but at a macro level, there's so much of an advantage that manufacturers have just by being in contact with the community and people that, are actually using these products on things like Instagram and social media. That I think that probably I'm not going to say outweighs, but it definitely parlays in nicely with being able to have the warranty information for manufacturers. I think I'm making a very broad statement, most pen manufacturers are probably not taking advantage enough of the opportunities of how engaged our community is online, because I know that's part of the reason why we, as the Goulet Pen Company, are like so interesting to a lot of our manufacturers, and why like I'm going to Germany to Lamy because they want to know we're like so directly like in contact grassroots with people who are using Lamy pens that the words that I say to them about like this is what Lamy customers want, that carries a ton of weight because I've done a lot of that research and my team is talking to you all day in and day out, and so we know just kind of from talking to you all what it is that you as Lamy users, and we are Lamy users ourselves, want. And so that information is very valuable to the manufacturer because then they can take that and make better products that you want more, and then you will buy them and be happy and really love the brand, and everybody wins, right? So it's just another kind of link in the chain, being able to set that communication in motion there. So as far as what you gain out of it, it's that communication, the feedback that you can provide, especially if they're asking any questions about like how often do you use your pens, how many pens do you have in your collection, what pens do you like, anything like that. It would be wise if they were to include that in there. I don't know if Stipula does. I should go online and check out what they have as their information thing, but I know I've done other warranty registration things where they've asked some things even like how much money do you make and all that, and I'm like, that's a little weird. I'm not going to answer that one, but I'll answer some other questions and give them some information, so be cognizant of that. But that's where there can be a benefit. And then I think largely too, most pen manufacturers at least are still primarily selling through brick and mortar stores, especially if they're based out of Japan or in Europe. That's much more common. In the US, it's like, where are there brick and mortar stores? There are fewer and fewer these days as time goes on. So online is kind of becoming much more common, especially in the fountain pen community, in the US anyway, but in Europe and other parts of the world for sure, it's not catching on quite as quickly. For a lot of different reasons, and we can get into that. But I think for that reason, the warranty card is more valuable in a brick and mortar type setting, just because if you're at a brick and mortar store and you're kind of buying through and you're paying in cash, or you don't want to give, like you might have your credit card, but you're not going to set up an account and give your address and all that kind of stuff like you would if you were buying something online. So it's harder to validate a purchase at an authorized retailer if you're buying at a brick and mortar store than it is if you're buying online, because you're already kind of granting a lot of that information. And like we have records, like you can go into your account with us and you can see like, oh yeah, I bought this in the past. We have those records too. So like if you haven't filled out a warranty registration card, it's seldom going to be a problem, especially if you bought through like an online retailer like us, because if there's ever any type of dispute, literally, and this rarely happens, but the manufacturer can contact us and be like, hey, did so-and-so customer buy this pen through you? And we'd be like, yep, here we go. We got the receipt, got the record right here. Yes, they made an authorized purchase. So we have record of that. And so that's part of what that value does for the warranty card too. Cool? All right. That was a very thorough question, wasn't it? All right. Ammo21MN. Ammo21MN on Instagram. How does one refrain from inking up all their pens? I'm asking for a friend. Right. Sweet. That's awesome. You're asking me about this, really? I don't know. I keep between 20 and 40 pens inked up at all times, so I'm probably not the best person to ask this question to. But I do aspire to keep a reasonable number of pens inked up. It really just depends on your own habits and what you're doing. There's no one right answer for everybody, right? I think that just like anything else in life, setting goals or maybe even constraints for yourself can often help in this way. For example, if you have a pen case that you carry around with you and it only holds 3 pens, and you're like, I'm only going to keep my inked up pens in this case, and if I get really excited about a new pen that I've gotten, I want to ink it up right away, because literally I just got this pen today and I want to ink it up. But I'm like, you know what? I have so many other pens already inked up. I'm gonna say no. I've got 3 pens inked up already. I have to clean one of them out. This eyedropper pen that's got a shimmering ink in it, and I don't ever want to clean it out. But you know what? I haven't been using it as much lately. I want to clean it out and put it away. I'm going to do that, and then I get to put my fancy new pen in here and carry it around with me. That is one way to discipline yourself. You can just make up an arbitrary number, or if you have like specific pen cases that you carry around all the time with you and you're like, no, I'm only going to keep the inked up pens in these cases, and that's it. It's going to be a 1 in, 1 out policy. That's how I'm going to do it. I think that can be very helpful to you if you need to instill a little discipline in your life. Or another way that I haven't really gone that route so much. Let's be honest. I have so many pen cases at my disposal. I'm like, oh, let me just grab another case. It's got 20 pens in here. Sure, I can carry more pens around. And I carry a backpack around with me everywhere too, so that's why I carry so many pens. And then I have a whole drawer in my pen cabinet area here that's labeled pens to be cleaned. And I have a tray of pens that need to be cleaned in there. And oftentimes the tray fills up and I just lay more pens on top of the other ones in the tray. And I'm like, okay, when it gets to the point where I'm like almost going to scratch the pens because I can't close the thing, then I'm like, okay, this is getting out of control, Brian. Get it together, man. Let's do a live stream on Instagram so that I can clean out my pens. So that's the route that I've ended up going is how do I keep from inking up all my pens? Physically, I need like some kind of constraint because I have so many pens and I get so excited about new inks and stuff. But really it ends up being, okay, it's more of a discipline of actually cleaning out my pens. It's less about discipline of inking them, more about cleaning them so that I can just keep practicality in my life. So that's what I do is I end up, this is a very specific thing to me, but I'll end up live streaming on Instagram and just talking to people while I clean out my pens. And it's fun, and I like to do it, and it helps you all, and I get to talk through how I clean my pens and stuff like that, and that's kind of cool. So I'll do that from time to time, sometimes on the Goulet, usually it's on the Goulet Pens account. Sometimes I'll do it on my personal Instagram, but more so on the Goulet account these days. But that is another option too. So it's really up to you, whatever makes the most sense for you. If you end up having a crazy pen life like me, maybe you can find some inspiration in my methods, but set an arbitrary number for yourself and I think it'll be good. All right, Jim P on Facebook. I have dozens of fountain pens from a variety of manufacturers. Most of them have converters. Where's my converter? Converters! Except for my most used pens, I've lost track of which converter goes with which pen. Whoa boy. Is there an easy way to figure out which converter goes with which pen? Most converters don't seem to have a company or manufacturer name etched into them. Thanks. Well, that's true, Jim. Feel your pain. This is just an interesting thing for me. I had to literally think about this. I was like, I handle these converters so often. I take for granted how I can literally, like, in a flash, look at a converter and be like, oh, that's an Aurora, that's a Parker, that's Standard International, that's a Lamy, that's whatever. Not only that, but I know, like, oh, that's a Pilot Con 40, Con 70, Con 50, the Lamy Z24 versus Z28. I live and breathe in this, so I've never had to personally give a ton of thought into, like, oh, how do I keep track of which converters are which? So one thing that you can do is come up with your own labeling system if you're really having that much trouble with it. Nail polish can work really well, like an acrylic nail polish, and you can just put like a colored dot on your converter itself and then have like a corresponding notebook or reference sheet or something like that and be like, I know that pink is Standard International or blue is Parker, whatever. That could be something that could help come up with your own kind of reference thing. Or just when you're not using the converter, take it out and store it in like a small Ziploc bag or something like that, like a labeled bag that has something tied to it that that's what it is. That can help too. If you just take them and throw them on your desk like I do, and then it ends up falling into a drawer and there's 16 of them in there and you're like, well, now this is grand, then you could end up being in a situation where you have to kind of sort and figure them out. If you find yourself in that situation where you have to sort and figure them out, and you don't maybe work in pens 16 hours a day like I do, and you have to like maybe think about it for half a second, we do have a cartridge converter guide on our website. I've got a link to it in our blog, and you can just, it's under the education tab, cartridge converter guide right there on gouletpens.com. You can reference that there. That, at least, it doesn't give you a visual on there necessarily. We could probably enhance that a little bit now that I'm thinking about it, but it's at least a verbal reference guide as to which pens use which types of converters. And then, of course, we have the website with at least all the converters that we carry as to which one is which. Or you can also Google too if you have have a Sheaffer pen and you're like, I don't remember which the Sheaffer converter is. I remember it's kind of unique, but I don't remember what it looks like. You can Google it or search around on different blogs and stuff like that, and you can at least get some kind of picture. Maybe more trouble than it's worth for you, but if you find yourself in that situation, you can do that. As kind of a last-ditch effort, you can always reach out to our team. You can email info@gouletpens.com. Very happy people that answer these questions all the time and are happy to help you, guide you in that way. Also, you can look on resources like the Fountain Pen Network or Fountain Pen Geeks Forum if you are kind of like wanting to crowdsource, and if you maybe have like a vintage pen or something that we don't carry here, we'll try our best to help you, but some things we're just like, I don't know. I don't know what, Ancora brand uses from 1989. I just don't know what converter that is. I'm sorry. I tried to Google it. I couldn't really find it. You might be able to post on something like Fountain Pen Network and be like, I have this pen, snap, here's a picture. I have no idea which converter fits it. Here's all the converters I have. And the community might be able to help you if we're not able to. So got lots of resources at your disposal, but hopefully that will help guide you a little bit in your converted ways, right? Last question I have for this week. This is from Roshan in an email. I have a question on nib sizes and speed of writing. I have a Parker Vector fine nib and a Sheaffer Safaris medium nib. While writing with the fine nib, I am able to write slowly and produce more beautiful letters than when I write with a medium nib. My handwriting is not too small and not too large. Does the nib size make the pen a slow or fast writer? Would you advise buying fine nib pens or medium nib pens? Okay, so this is like it's up to the individual kind of answer. Like, that's really, if I just wanted to cop out and say, nope, I'm gonna bounce, I wanna leave early because I'm filming this the day before Thanksgiving and peace, I would just leave it at that and say, it depends. And it's really up to the individual. And then I would just leave. But I'm not gonna do that. That's how devoted I am to you all here today. Anyway, so it's a very individual thing. Physically speaking, if you're talking about a fine versus a medium, or let's go like an extra fine to a broad or a stub, like there's a lot of more tipping material on these fatter nibs. Physically speaking, there might be a little more friction that provides resistance with a fatter nib because more of the material is touching the page, I guess. Or you could argue complete opposite of that an extra fine nib might be scratchier and dig in a little bit more and give you more resistance than maybe a broad nib, which might feel smoother. Either way that you make the argument, I don't think that in terms of a actual like physical restriction of creating resistance on the page, that it makes one lick of difference what nib size you have in terms of how fast you actually write. I think it purely has to do with your own like cognizance and comfort level of how it is that you're writing. I mean, I'm not joking. I personally write with a fine or an extra fine nib, and I write a little more slowly with them. And when I write with a broad or something, I write a lot faster because broads feel smoother to me. They put down more ink on the page. I write sloppier, maybe a little bit with them, but my handwriting looks better with a stub than it does even with an extra fine. It's weird. It's different for everybody, right? Like, I think universally most people like the way that their handwriting actually looks with an extra fine or a fine nib. I think mine actually looks worse. I'm gonna try not to hit my mic when I do that. Make any jump there as she's listening to it. But I gotta, as I'm writing with extra fine and fine nibs, I have to write way slower for my handwriting to look good. Some people feel the complete opposite. They feel like if they write with broad nibs, they have to slow down a lot because all the words kind of mesh together and it makes their handwriting look worse. It's just real super interesting thing to me because the vast majority, I think, of the pen community prefers extra fine and fine nibs because they think their handwriting looks better that way. I'm the complete opposite. I think my handwriting looks better the faster and broader that I write. And the larger I write with a big wet kind of broad nib and big loops and stuff like that, I think my handwriting looks better than if I write with a really, really fine nib. That's just me. But it doesn't really have anything physically to do with the size of the nib, right? Like it's all psychological and it's all based on your own brain and how it's kind of processing what you're writing and how it feels to you and how much you've practiced with both and all these kinds of things. I think most people are more comfortable with like fine and extra fine nibs just because most pens that they've probably used in their life have been a little bit on the finer end. Like you're probably not writing with like a Sharpie, you know what I mean, most of the time in terms of your fine handwriting, right? So a broad and a calligraphy, stub nib is going to feel a little bit more Sharpie-like than it will writing with, say, a traditional kind of rollerball pen. So I think most people tend to be more comfortable with, say, fine nibs, at least. And this is another like super interesting, I'm going on a tangent a little bit. This is another really interesting thing to me in terms of different parts of the world, because I know from talking to different manufacturers and stuff that a lot of the U.S. market is different than other parts of the world. Like in Japan and other parts of Asia, like finer nibs are much more popular. Part of that has to do with the language, right? Like especially writing like a kanji script or something like that. There's a lot of intricate details to writing those characters. So really fine nibs are what's necessary to be able to write that and have it look practical. In Europe, for example, they have, generally speaking, they have much better quality paper that'll put down like really nice ink and will hold up to it well. So I think, medium nibs, like fine and medium nibs tend to be a little more popular, and even broad nibs to a degree tend to be more popular in Europe. In the US, we have like bad handwriting and we have terrible paper. So we just end up being kind of a hot mess. So people that are just switching over to fountain pens tend to prefer extra fine and fine nibs just because the paper that we have, like broadly speaking, I mean, we have some access to nice paper here in the US, but it's like a fraction if you think about like the paper mills and what we're actually putting through our printers and stuff like that, inkjet printers and whatnot, very absorbent paper. So, most legal pads and copy paper and stuff like that are super absorbent for fountain pen ink. And so using things like medium and broad nibs are largely impractical for most people, and that's why medium and especially broad nibs tend to be much less popular in the US than say in other parts of the world. So there's a lot of different factors here that come into it, but it's very much of a personal preference thing. I think that what you are saying here about slowing down, writing with a fine nib, having it look better than a medium nib, I think that largely kind of speaks to generally what I've seen anyway, and what we've seen at Goulet pens here is what's kind of the standard for most people using fountain pens, but it's definitely not the case for everybody, and it really doesn't have anything physically to do with the nib itself. It's more about how the writing actually looks on the page. Cool. All right, we have done it. Right, we're at the end of another Q&A. My question of the week for this week is, how many pens do you keep inked up at a time? And I want you to be honest with yourself. You can give an average if you want to, but not how many do you aspire to or try to, but how many realistically are you keeping inked up at a time? And then maybe if you want to kind of put a part 2 onto that question, how many pens do you actually have? So if you're like, I only keep 4 pens inked at a time because I only have 4 pens and they're always inked. I'd be curious to know that. If you're like, my full collection is 30 pens, but I'm very disciplined about keeping 8 inked up at any one time. That would just be curious to me, just to know really selfishly for myself, like how much off the deep end have I been going in terms of how many pens I keep inked up at a time. Maybe I'm just like normal and it's like not that bad, or maybe it's like, oh man, Brian really is kind of an extreme case here. In which case, maybe that's not so bad either. I'm okay with that, I think, in this area of my life, if I'm a little bit off the deep end, because, I spend a disproportionate amount of my time in this world, right? And maybe you don't, that's okay. But maybe you do, and maybe I'm just one amongst friends. So either way, I'd be very curious to know. So go ahead and leave it in the comments on YouTube or on the blog. I'd be happy to know. So that's it for this week. I hope you enjoyed this one, and we'll keep on putting more out. I hope you're enjoying the holiday season as it's coming about, whatever holidays you're celebrating. There's a lot going on this time of year. It's a very exciting time. And I hope you're enjoying the rest of your 2017 while it's still here, because we're going to blink and it's going to be gone. This whole year is just like gone. I don't know what's happened. Like, really, Andy, what's happened in 2017? I don't know. Maybe I'm just getting older and time flies, right? I know most of you are watching this like, you're not that old, Brian. I know. But still, no spring chicken either. Anyway, that's it for this week. Have a good rest of your week, and right on.